air it out. Down the field. Catch and a touchdown.
It's College Football Pick'em, presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. Here's your host, Nick Kosko.
Welcome inside to College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. I'm your host, Nick Kosko. We are presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu, located inside the Attila's Gym in Egg Harbor Township. It is finally championship weekend, folks. Oh my goodness, I can't believe we have gotten here after everything that went on during the summer in terms of will football happen, will it not happen, conferences canceling, conferences coming back, and all of a sudden we are here finally at conference championship weekend. Big Ten, SEC, you name it, ACC, some hot matchups here today, starting at noon, going well into the night. And of course, the final college football playoff rankings come out tomorrow, so we have a lot to dive into as we move forward. And then, of course, starting next week, we can start talking about the college football playoff semifinals, some of the other bowl matchups, what we like for the New Year's Six, and of course, if there's any other intriguing bowl matchups, of course, as teams are opting out. Some teams are getting in at with only 3 wins, just based on what's going on this year. There was no requirement, so we'll get into all of that next week. And of course, today we're going to be previewing what's going on with these championship games. And of course, we have for our 5 pick segment later in the show, 30, 33, and 2 on the season. All 5 games will be conference championship games that do have some sort of playoff aspirate or some sort of playoff meaning or implications moving forward. So we will dive into that as well. For now, looking at the last set of rankings, we talked about this going into last week, right? The right scenarios and how some of these teams can make these jumps up. But what we saw on Tuesday was probably the worst possible thing that could happen for the college football playoff and these rankings moving forward. It really was. And that was Florida dropping only 1 spot. And that's also including Iowa State having 2 losses and being number 6. Now, we've mentioned it a couple times on this show where we look back at that scenario a couple years ago. Penn State won the Big Ten with 2 losses. They even had a head-to-head victory over Ohio State, but yet Ohio State got into the college football playoff with 1 loss to Penn State, who was the Big Ten champion. But because Penn State had 2 losses that year, including a bad loss to Pitt, which was their final nail in the coffin, they didn't get in. If they don't lose that game to Pitt, they get in. If they just have 1 loss, they get in. It doesn't matter because they beat Ohio State head-to-head and they win the Big Ten, they get in. So this this bias against 2-loss teams, I guess you can call it, from the playoff committee, it sticks every year. If you have more than 1 loss, you're basically guaranteed to not get in. I'm not so sure. Other than having an unprecedented college football season, what's changed this year? I know teams are playing different amounts of games, but if you want to get the best of the best quality, I know some teams' schedules are weaker than others, but if you've had this bias or if you've had this notion that 2-loss teams are not one of your top 4 all year long, or they're not a top 4 team going into the final week, these final set of rankings, then how do you explain dropping Florida 1 spot after their loss to LSU? Let's not forget, folks, and I will come out and admit this, of course, and I own up to it, I picked Florida as a preseason national title contender. I thought Florida had a great shot to making the playoff, at the very least. I thought they were going to make the playoff. And if not, and if they were going to make the playoff, I thought, okay, this team has a very darn good shot to winning it all. I thought Florida ultimately was going to come out of the SEC and make the playoff, maybe along with Bama. But I figured Florida. I love Florida as a preseason team and as a national title contender, and somehow they're still in there. Yet they lost to LSU, and we know what LSU is this year. They're an absolute dumpster fire. LSU's a dumpster fire. They're under 500. They're 4-5. Ed Orgeron hasn't really lost control of that locker room, but we've seen, obviously, out of the 22 starters from last year, what is it, 21 were not back this year because of the NFL draft and also guys opting out, i.e. Jamar Chase, their best receiver, who some make the argument for was better than Justin Jefferson last year, he opted out right away. He didn't play at all this year. Miles Brennan, the guy who took over for Joe Burrow at quarterback, played pretty well through the first couple of games, and he has some sort of phantom injury. I mean, I call it a phantom injury like that because I feel like we forgot all about Miles Brennan, and he's still above a couple quarterbacks in terms of his passing yards this year. I think he's stuck at almost 1,200 yards this year, or just over 1,100 yards this year, and that's still better than some of these SEC quarterbacks all season long. And the guy played like three and a half games. So and then LSU goes to their third different quarterback this year on the road against Florida, true freshman. Florida Gators, meanwhile, folks, have a Heisman frontrunner, Heisman contender. Maybe he's only a contender now because they lost again, and maybe more people are respecting Devontae Smith, the wide receiver from Alabama, or even looking at Mac Jones, Alabama's quarterback. Kyle Trask has 40 touchdowns this year. He has Joe Burrow numbers this year. You think with a quarterback like that, this team would never lose. And I get their defense was not as good as LSU's last year, of course. Florida's defense is a little shoddy. And sure enough, their second loss, which should be their death sentence in terms of their playoff aspirations, doesn't do anything to them. They dropped one spot. This is a 23-point favorite at home. 23 points, folks. And don't forget, we know that because we had Florida last week. That was one of our 3 losses. 2-3 last week. And we had Florida minus 23 at home. I came on the air last week and I said, Florida is going to absolutely dismantle LSU because they are going to show why they deserve to have a crack at the playoff. This is a team that's in the SEC championship already. They have a quarterback that is Joe Burrow-esque. LSU is a shell of themselves. Their defense is horrendous. Bo Pelini is probably going to get fired after the year. And sure enough, LSU wins this football game 37-34 because they were aided by Marco Wilson throwing a shoe. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and look that up. It was tied at 34 late in the game. Florida gets a third down stop, right? Third down stop. And they get that third down stop, and sure enough, LSU is going to punt. Florida get the ball back, probably set up for a game-winning field goal, right? No harm, no foul. Sure enough, Marco Wilson takes I think it was Cole Taylor, the tight end for LSU, picks up his shoe, throws it across the field, and it's a 15-yard unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. Leads to the LSU game-winning field goal. Florida gets the ball back. They miss their game-tying field goal, and sure enough, they're upset. And after all that, for what LSU is this year, Florida already has a loss to Texas A&M, who's number 5, by the way, and their only loss is to Alabama, so Texas A&M is right where they should be. But you mean to tell me after that loss, Florida's only penalized one spot? Why? And I get they're grouped in 6, 7, and 8. Florida's number 7 right now, folks. This is why the rankings are weird outside the top 5. Iowa State, Florida, and Georgia all have 2 losses. Iowa State and Florida both 8-2. Georgia 7-2. They have lost to Alabama, and they have lost to Florida. You would think, and Georgia, by the way, moved up a spot. Georgia moved up the spot after last week. They dismantled number 25 Mizzou. So at the time, Mizzou, of course, ranked. It's a ranked victory, so there you go. You could justify moving Georgia up, but doesn't their loss to Florida look worse now? Because Florida lost to LSU? You would think so. Iowa State has surged up the rankings in the past couple weeks. And they lost to Louisiana. That's no disrespect to Louisiana, but they're number 19 in the country. They're 9-1 on the year. Louisiana lost to Coastal Carolina. And Coastal Carolina is undefeated, so by transitive property, shouldn't Coastal Carolina be better than Iowa State at this point? That's why these rankings make no sense. And this is why the group of 5 is almost virtually no shot every year. Because the Power 5 teams, even with 2 losses, are better than group of 5 teams that are undefeated. Such as Iowa State, Florida, and Georgia, 2 losses, are still above Cincinnati, who's at number 9. And they're 8-0. So it makes no sense. It absolutely makes no sense. Coastal Carolina's the team that beat BYU. They've beaten Louisiana. That's 2 ranked victories. They're 11-0, folks. 11-0. I don't care who they've played. They're the only team to be 11-0 right now this year. And they're number 12. They're behind Indiana. They were ranked behind Indiana, who's 6-1. And I get they beat everybody in the Big Ten except Ohio State. Indiana's a good football program. But you mean to tell me Indiana's still above them, playing 7 games and has a loss? Coastal Carolina can't at least be a top 10 team? Oklahoma 7-2, by the way. Oklahoma, folks, still has an outside shot at the playoff with 2 losses. So these 2-loss teams just make no sense. You would think an undefeated team like Cincinnati, who's been dominating everybody this year, dominating everybody. Cincinnati has killed everybody except Central Florida, who they beat by 3. And Central Florida is, as of recent history, at least recently, historically, a great Group of 5 team. And they were the self-proclaimed national champions a couple years ago. So my whole argument here with this with these latest rankings is it doesn't matter if you lose 2 games, you can still get in. Hell, Florida is going to get in if they beat Alabama. I wouldn't doubt that at all. If they somehow upset Alabama, you're going to have 2 SEC teams in. You know who that's going to affect? Ohio State. So here's a wacky scenario for you right now. Even if Iowa State wins, folks, because they play Oklahoma today in the Big 12 championship game, let's just say, for giggles, Iowa State wins, right? Big 12 champs, 9-2. They're still stuck at number 6, but they're probably going to jump Texas A&M because Texas A&M plays Tennessee, and Tennessee is hot garbage this year as well. Texas A&M is going to be stuck in purgatory probably at number 5. Iowa State wins. Let's say they even jump to number 5. Now let's say Florida upsets Alabama. Florida is the SEC champ at 9-2. They have 2 losses. Bama now is 10-1. Only loss is to Florida in the title game. What does that do for the rankings now? This is why Florida's still being in this position. Now, do I think they're going to beat Alabama? No. But they can cause absolute chaos, and the committee is going to be left with their heads spinning. Of course, they're going to come to a decision on Sunday, tomorrow. But this might be the most controversial top 4 ever if Florida beats Alabama. Because then what do you do? Because Notre Dame is 10-0, and people are making the argument that even if Notre Dame loses to Clemson today, they should still be in. Clemson's only lost to Notre Dame, but now they have Trevor Lawrence back, and Notre Dame being 10-0, running through the ACC this year, first year in a conference, everyone is going to make the argument that if Clemson beats Notre Dame, those 2 should still be in the playoff. So now you have 2. So let's just say that happens. Clemson beats Notre Dame. Now you have 2 spots locked up. Florida beats Alabama. You have Alabama, who's been basically the de facto number 1 team all year. Aside from that, I think maybe 1 week Clemson, a couple weeks Clemson early in the year was above them until Alabama started playing, and then Alabama eventually took over number 1. But Alabama, nearly wire-to-wire number 1 team. If they lose to Florida, they're going to be 10-1, Florida 9-2. Then what do you do? And let's say, for argument's sake, like I said, Clemson beats Notre Dame today. Clemson or Notre Dame are going to get in. Clemson's definitely going to get in, obviously. ACC champ. Trevor Lawrence, 10-1. Already number 3 coming in. Notre Dame losing is number 2. They lose to the number 3 team. I mean, I see no reason why to keep them out. So there you go. 2 spots are locked up. Forget the order. Alabama, do you kick them out? Do you keep them in? The problem is, if Florida upsets Alabama, you can't justify keeping Alabama in, losing to Florida, and keeping Florida out. How do you justify that? That's virtually the same argument as Penn State, Ohio State a couple years ago. And looking back on it, I probably would put Penn State in the playoff over Ohio State because they had the head-to-head. Despite the 2 losses, they had the head-to-head, and they won the conference title. In this instance, same thing. Except they play in the final game of the year. Florida would have the head-to-head over Alabama and a conference title. So now what happens? By that justification, you have to keep both those teams in. So what happens to Ohio State? The committee has been propping up Ohio State all year long. Right? Preseason. They figured they'd be a top 4 team preseason anyway, without playing a game. They've played 5 this year. I fully expect them to, beat Northwestern. And Northwestern's a darn good football team. They're number 14, so that's a good win for Ohio State. But they'll only be 6-0. They're undefeated, but they're 6-0. Big Ten champs. Now what happens? Forget Texas A&M. Forget Iowa State because they'll beat Oklahoma, but Florida has the better win. And I make the argument that Florida has better losses, right? They lost to Texas A&M, and they lost to a conference foe in LSU, despite the fact that LSU stinks. Iowa State lost to Louisiana, a non-Power 5 team, despite being a top 20 team, and they also lost the conference for Oklahoma State. So you can make the argument that Florida has better losses than Iowa State. So boom, they're above them in this scenario. But if Florida beats Bama and Clemson beats Notre Dame, I mean, are those your 4 teams, no matter what Ohio State does? Because if Ohio State wins, this is why the committee putting Florida at number 7 created this mess themselves. They could have avoided all of this. They dropped them. Because, for example, let's say Florida was number 8 or even number 9. For argument's sake, Cincinnati should be number 6 or at least number 7, folks. If you want to stick it behind one of those 2-loss teams, you know what? Fine. I'd argue Iowa State because LSU should have dropped further after the LSU loss. That's just my opinion, but I'm going based on the rankings right now. If that were the case, if Florida dropped further, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Even if they did upset Alabama, they would say, okay, Florida, you won the SEC, you'll get a New Year's Six bowl, but you have 2 bad losses. Or excuse me, 1 bad loss, but you have 2 losses. So we're going to keep our 2-loss requirement here that if you have 2 losses, you're probably not going to get in. So Alabama, we'll put you in, even though you lost the SEC title game, but you've been number 1 all year, so we'll put you at the number 4 spot. The committee could have avoided all of this chaos. And I get, as fans and media, we want more chaos for these rankings because it gives us something to talk about, gives us something to write about as well. But doing this now, they created the worst possible situation for you. I just outlined it for you. That's the worst possible scenario. If Florida upsets Bama, Clemson beats Notre Dame, Ohio State wins, now what do? You have 5 quote-unquote worthy teams of being in the playoff. You're not going to kick Notre Dame out. They have 1 loss. I can't imagine a scenario where if Clemson beats Notre Dame, they kick them out. Unless Clemson blows the doors off them and then someone else really impresses them, maybe you slide Notre Dame out. But you're not going to be able to do that. At that point, it's really hard to justify keeping out both SEC squads and both ACC squads. That's how I look at it. Ohio State is going to move from 4 to 5 if in this scenario. Even if they win, they'll have a quality win, but they've only played 6 games. Is there SEC bias in these rankings? I believe there is. It's kind of hard it's kind of hard to say otherwise. Out of the top 10 coming into the week, Bama, Texas A&M, Florida, Georgia, right there, 4 of the top 10 are the SEC. There's 2 Big 12s in there, 2 ACCs, 1 Big 10, and a group of 5. That's it. That is it. The College Football Playoff Committee did this to themselves. Florida should not be number 7. They should be lower. Ideally, the committee would want this. Bama to beat Florida. They're out of the picture. They don't care what happens with Clemson and Notre Dame. They're probably both going to make it. And then Ohio State wins. There you go. Your top 4 is right there. Your top 4 going into today is in all likelihood, folks, your top 4, Bama, Notre Dame, Clemson, and Ohio State, that's going to be your top 4 tomorrow night. When they reveal the final rankings and they announce the semifinal matchups, you're probably going to see Bama, Ohio State, and again, if I'm the committee, I want to find a way to avoid a Notre Dame, Clemson Part 3 in the semifinals. So ideally, if I'm the committee, I'm rooting for all 4 of those teams to get in, right? Bama wins, they're in. Notre Dame and Clemson probably both in, and then if Ohio State wins, they're going to get in too. If that's the case, then what do? If Alabama and Notre Dame win, right, they're your top 2. And then you're probably going to move Clemson to number 4 if Ohio State wins. But then this creates more of the chaos. If Bama and Notre Dame win, they're obviously 1 and 2, right? But now Clemson has 2 losses. I mentioned the 2 losses. So Ohio State, as long as they win, they're going to move up to number 3. So they'll be number 3, and you're going to have Ohio State against Notre Dame. And now who does Alabama play? Number 1 Alabama plays number 4 who? Clemson? They have 2 losses, but they've only lost to Notre Dame, but it was twice. Or do you flip-flop Clemson and Texas A&M as long as they win? Because at that point, Florida's out, right? 3 losses, they lost to Alabama. Now what do? Now that fourth spot is open between a 2-loss Clemson, let's just say for argument's sake, a 1-loss Texas A&M without a conference title and already lost to Bama. Let's say Iowa State wins, 9-2, Big 12 champ. They were number 6. So who do you put in that spot? And let's throw it in there. Cincinnati dominates Tulsa. Tulsa's ranked. Don't forget about Tulsa, folks. Tulsa's number 23. What if Cincinnati goes out and dominates them? They're 9-0, conference champ. And Cincinnati has dominated everybody all year. Now what do? You have 4 teams for 1 spot. For argument's sake, at least what I would do, Clemson would be out because they have 2 losses. Now you're down between Texas A&M, Iowa State, and Cincinnati. And for me, if I'm going to go by the playoffs requirements or what they would like to see, which is conference championships, Texas A&M's not getting in. Sure, they only lost to Alabama, but that Florida win does not look as good now, even though it was an upset at the time. Doesn't look as good now. They're out. Didn't win a conference title. Sorry. If you want, you have to stick to your guns on this. They didn't win a conference title. So now you're down between Cincinnati and Iowa State. Do you want a Power 5 Big 12 champion, Iowa State? Or do you want to make history and put an undefeated Group of 5 champion there in Cincinnati? In reality, Iowa State or Cincinnati is probably going to get thwarted by Alabama by at least 14 to 17 points at minimum, folks. That's how I see it playing out. Whoever plays Alabama in that semifinal game is probably going to be screwed unless it is Ohio State or Clemson. But if you have Iowa State or Cincinnati, it doesn't really matter. So you might as well just put Cincinnati in because they're undefeated. But then, people are going to argue, well, if Cincinnati was really, if Cincinnati was really your darling and going undefeated was a big part of it, why were they below Iowa State, Florida, and Georgia to start the week? Because they all had 2 losses coming in. And therein lies the problem. The rankings are too much eye test. I like the eye test, don't get me wrong. I like what I need to see, all right? I can tell by looking who on the field, who is good, who is not. I can tell you right now, Cincinnati is a better football team right now than Georgia and Florida right now, and probably Iowa State right now by my eye test. But therein lies your problem with these rankings. All right, we'll step aside, take a quick break. On the other side, we will take a look at the conference championship games, some of the other games going on today as well that could have implications towards the playoff, i.e. Texas A&M playing Tennessee. And we will also get into the picks later in the show, of course, picking 5 conference championship games. And we'll be looking at Cincinnati. Cincinnati's been our darling all year. We're going to take a look at that game as well coming up. Keep it locked here. It's College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio.
Betting college football? You've come to the right place. It's College Football Pick'em, presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio.
Welcome back. It's College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. I'm your host, Nick Kosko. We are presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu. Be sure to check them out inside the Attilis Gym in Egg Harbor Township. Also check out the website, harborjiujitsu.com. And, of course, check them out on Facebook and Instagram as well. Classes all week. Just added a ladies striking, by the way, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 2 to 3 p.m. And those classes are free till the end of the month, till the new year starts. Be sure to check out my guys over at Harbor Jiu-Jitsu, located inside the Attilis Gym in Egg Harbor Township. All right, I was going to dive into some of the other matchups for today, aside from the conference championship games, but I wanted to talk about something first that it is hilarious, and these conference commissioners, these ADs, all these people, they just love to take shots at each other in the media. They'll never say this face to face. They'll say it out loud. To take a look at the whole thing that happened with Dabo Swinney and Mike Norvell earlier this year, Clemson head coach and the Florida State head coach, right? I mean, they were, Clemson's claiming that Florida State backed out of a game due to COVID because they were scared, they didn't want to play. For lack of better terms, that's basically what Swinney was implying, because Clemson did arrive in Tallahassee the day of the game and they canceled that game. What was it, 90 minutes before kickoff? That was what, earlier? I think it was early in November that happened. So, I mean, you've seen it a lot this year, and now Bob Bowlesby, the Big 12 commissioner, he took a shot at Ohio State and the College Football Playoff Committee as a whole, really, the other day. I believe this was on Friday or Thursday. I think it was Thursday. It's just, it's borderline hilarious, actually, when he thinks about it. And I will quote him. He goes, and he was talking about, of course, he's trying to prop up Iowa State, and we were talking about Iowa State in the previous segment and how, and again, I will criticize the committee for the rankings. It's mostly because of Florida, and despite the fact that I do have a love for the Florida Gators, and I would love to see them in the playoff and win a national title, and I love Kyle Trask. I think he's going to be a pretty good NFL quarterback down the line. Probably needs a couple years to develop, but that's beside the point. But I can criticize the committee as well. From my seat, from my microphone, I'm the committee. I would like to know what goes through their heads with some of these rankings for sure, as do a lot of people. But Bob Bowlesby, and I quote, he said this the other day, and of course, again, I mentioned before, he's going to prop up Iowa State, right? And of course, he'll take a shot at Ohio State, as a lot of teams and players, coach, whatever the case may be, they're doing that this year, right? Because the Big Ten came back late. They were the first conference to cancel. And then the Pac-12 followed. I mean, the Pac-12 just follows in their footsteps, but the Big Ten canceled. And they said, "Oh wait, we'll come back," and because they realized the rest of the Power Five was working, playing football, so they came back late October. And of course, the playoff committee, which probably rightfully so, propped up Ohio State as a contender without them even playing a game. Right? I mean, remember when they were ranked? They were at least top 6 at one point this year, and they didn't play a single game yet. Now they're 5-0, and they've remained at 4-0, or sorry, at number 4 overall. So Bob Bowlesby said this the other day. And I quote, "If Iowa State were to win the championship game, they would have won 6 straight games, the same number that Ohio State has played the entire season." He goes on to say, "One of the things they're going to have to reconcile is the differences in the numbers, or in the number of contests played. There's a certain extent to where this is a war of attrition." So he was criticizing the committee in that latter part of that quote. I mean, he is basically right, folks, but I mean, the only reason why I disagree with him is because Ohio State and Iowa State, you put them on the field together, Ohio State would mop the floor with Iowa State. It's no contest. And I get Ohio State had a close game against Indiana. Frankly, I think Indiana, with a healthy Michael Penix Jr., would probably beat Iowa State this year, too. That's nothing against Iowa State. But there's a stark difference between Ohio State and the Iowa State Cyclones. The reason why Ohio State is at number 4, despite only playing 5 games, is because the preseason rankings and the rankings before they even played, the committee put them in that position. The AP poll put them in that position. So blame the pollsters beforehand. I feel like, wow, we are going back in time here. I feel like we've been doing this all year, blaming the pollsters. I wonder what happened this year where we're blaming pollsters all year long, right? So you go back to before Ohio State even played a game. The AP poll, coaches poll, when they were eligible to put Ohio State in, because some polls were putting them in and others were keeping them out until they started playing or they were announced to be playing, right? Blame them. Blame them first. And also, don't forget Iowa State. You've lost 2 games this year. I bet you if Ohio State played a full schedule, and again, we could play the what-if game all day long, and it does nobody any good. But if Ohio State plays even if they played their full 8-game schedule this year, in a truncated season, they're going 8-0. Other than the Indiana game, who was the surprise of the Big Ten all year long, who's beating them? Who is beating Ohio State? Let's be realistic about that. And the fact that the Big Ten, who I've vastly disagree with for the most part this entire college football season, they made the right decision by saying, okay, forget that 6-game minimum requirement to get to the conference title game. Ohio State, you're in. You're 5-0. You're good enough. You beat Indiana head-to-head. Go in. But look at the games that were canceled for Ohio State. At Maryland. Maryland had one great game this year, folks. They're decent, Maryland, this year. But, don't let that first game fool you. Or, sorry, they were awful the first game. I take that back. And then they look bad in their last 2 games, so to speak. Don't forget, Maryland has been all over the place this year. Lost 43-3 in Northwestern, but then they just edged out Minnesota, who's down this year, and they beat Penn State, who also stinks this year, by 16. Great. 2-1. Taulia Tagovailoa, Tua's younger brother, looks pretty good. Then they had 2 games in a row canceled. Actually, out of their next 4 weeks, they had 3 games canceled. You mean to tell me they were going to upset Ohio State? No way. Not happening. Game against Michigan State was canceled. They lost to Indiana 27-11. Fine. Game against Michigan, canceled. Then they lost to Rutgers. Rutgers, folks. And again, I'm a Rutgers guy. They're a lot better this year than they were under Chris Ash the entire time Ash was there because Shiano's back, but they lost to Rutgers. Granted, Maryland was down to 2 different quarterbacks. They didn't have Tagovailoa back there. But they lost to Rutgers at home. All right? They lost to him at home. I don't care who's back there. They lost to Rutgers at home. Rutgers is the rebuilding team. It is the definition of rebuilding in the Big Ten, and Rutgers has done a pretty darn good job this year for what it's worth. But, Ohio State's not losing to Maryland. Illinois, they fired Lovie Smith. Ohio State's not losing to Illinois. I don't care if Illinois upset Wisconsin last year. Ohio State within the last 5 years does not lose games like that. They'll lose to Penn State when Penn State's good. They don't. And by the way, they don't lose to Michigan. Jim Harbaugh can't beat Ohio State, so you can't tell me that Ohio State was going to lose to Michigan in the horseshoe the other week when that game was canceled. No way. So for argument's sake, I'm going to say Ohio State would be 8-0 anyway. Would Bob Bowlesby be saying the same thing if, by the way, two of those 3 games that were canceled for Ohio State were the other team's fault? One, I believe it was the Illinois game that was Ohio State's fault because they almost had the Michigan State game canceled and they ended up beating Michigan State by 40. So if 2 other teams did what they were supposed to do and had no breakouts, Ohio State would be 7-0. Even if they were 7-0, folks, would Bob Bowlesby be saying the same thing? 7 games compared to 10 games? And I get the argument, well, you're rewarded for not losing but also playing less games. Essentially, if you're 6-0, 7-0, you're better off than a 9-1 or even an 8-2 team, which in that case, yeah, I could see where they're coming from. But would Bob Bowlesby be saying that if 2 other teams did what they were supposed to and Ohio State was even 7-0 going into the conference title game? No way. He wouldn't have the guts to say that. But just because they played 5 games and the Big Ten made an exception for them to play today against Northwestern, that's the only reason why he said that. And plus, he's trying to prop up Iowa State. Meanwhile, Iowa State shouldn't be where they are right now. Frankly, I still don't think they're a better team than Florida, but because Florida lost to LSU, their ranking is granted. Heck, the way Georgia's playing right now, offensively, Iowa State might not be better than Georgia. And they are certainly not better. They certainly don't have a better resume than Cincinnati, in my mind. Iowa State can still get in. They very well could be in the top 4. You know how they're going to get in the top 4? They would need Ohio State to lose. They probably need Clemson to lose. If 3 and 4 lose, Iowa State probably gets bumped up if they beat Oklahoma. And you know what's going to be funnier, folks? This would be even funnier to watch. I want to see Bob Bowlesby's reaction if Oklahoma beats Iowa State. Oklahoma's number 10. Virtually have no shot to get to the playoff unless there's total chaos and the world comes to an end. Oklahoma could sneak in, but they won't. Number 10 Oklahoma beats number 6 Iowa State. Bob Bowlesby is going to go back under his rock and he won't say a word. Will not say a word because the Big 12 will have no shot to get in. And Oklahoma, by the way, was their ticket to the playoff each of the last 3 seasons. Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, all under Lincoln Riley. Big 12 champs every single year. Going for their 4th straight under Lincoln Riley. With a 4th different quarterback. And they still won't get in. Because they had those 2 bad losses earlier in the year. But that'd be so hilarious. Oklahoma, the gold standard of the Big 12 right now. If they manage to win 7 straight... Oklahoma, by the way, has won 6 straight games. He's not talking about Oklahoma, only because they're number 10. If they win 7 straight games and beat Iowa State, the Big 12's out. So, of course, Bob Bowlesby is going to prop up Iowa State. But if he was this adamant about it, why is he not criticizing Texas A&M? And again, Texas A&M, probably a better football team right now. Only 1 loss, but they're 7-1. They've only played 8 games. That's 2 less than Iowa State. Texas A&M is not playing for an SEC title. Why isn't Bob Bowlesby going after Texas A&M? Ohio State is the easy target. That's why. Ohio State's such an easy target because the way the Big Ten, the way they screwed up things this year, saying they were the first ones to go to a conference-only schedule. They announced it. Then they canceled 6 days later. Then they eventually came back. The Big Ten did it to themselves. But you also can't forget the reason why Iowa State is still below Ohio State is because Iowa State lost to Louisiana the first week of the season. So you didn't earn. They were 3-2, folks. They were 3-2. They've won 5 in a row. But here's who Iowa State's beaten since they were 3-2. And don't forget, lost to Louisiana. They edged TCU, by the way, by 3. They did beat Oklahoma in the first game. Good win. They beat Texas Tech. Lost to Oklahoma State, who's been up and down despite looking like a playoff contender early on. But then here's who Iowa State beat since then. Kansas. Dumpster fire. Not a dumpster fire, but, rebuilding. That's a 5-year rebuilding process for Les Miles to even become competitive again with Kansas. They beat Baylor, who is somehow not good this year. They shut out Kansas State. Doesn't have their starting quarterback. Beat Texas. Texas is their own mess. I don't care if they're a decent football team. They're their own mess. And they dominated West Virginia. So they've had 2 blowouts out of the last 3 weeks. But against Kansas State and West Virginia. You edge Texas. You blow out Kansas to start your win streak. I mean, come on. Ohio State's beating everybody down 2. But again, committee's going to use the eye test. You need to condemn the committee more than Ohio State. Because if you line up these 2 teams, as I mentioned in the last segment, if you line up these 2 teams on the field at the same time, Ohio State beats Iowa State 9 times out of 10. You can never say 10 out of 10 unless you're putting Alabama against Iowa State. Ohio State beats this team 9 times out of 10. They have the far better quarterback. They have the far better offense entirely. They have the better coach. I love Matt Campbell. Love what he's done with the Cyclones. But they have Ryan Day. There's a reason why Ohio State is this good. And they have the number 2 recruiting class, according to 24/7 Sports. Iowa State does not have the number 2 recruiting class. They're not a factory like Ohio State. So Bowlesby taking that shot. It's easy just because Ohio State's played 5 games. But you mean to tell me by watching these 2 teams all year long, can you tell me Iowa State is better than Ohio State anyway? You've had a 10-game sample size with Iowa State, and it's still not enough to convince me that Iowa State is better than the Buckeyes. It's just not. It's just not. Let's take a look at the schedule now going on, aside from the conference championship games, as we move forward on this Saturday morning. Well, we know the big one is Texas A&M. I mean, again, they're not going to lose on the road to Tennessee. I'd be shocked at this point. But obviously, Texas A&M needs to win this game to keep their playoff hopes alive. And it is kind of intriguing this year. I will say, just based on the way the schedule ended up working out. And again, it is a COVID year, so we're probably never going to see this again. Maybe some of these ideas, having teams play on championship weekend as an extra game could be cool. But I mean, I think it's only happening this year because teams have to reschedule some of these games to get the right amount of games in. So I don't think we're going to necessarily see this again. But Texas A&M winning today, I mean, they can improve their resume. If they dominate Tennessee, they're like, okay, if there's a spot open, Texas A&M is going to say to the committee, put us in. If there's a spot open, which there might not be a spot open. If the top 4 are in, which they're probably going to be, I can easily foresee it being Bama wins, Clemson beats Notre Dame, those are both in, Ohio State wins, and there's your top 4. So A&M is not going to get in anyway. But that's a game to look out for, as Texas A&M takes on Tennessee later, at noon. Beg your pardon. I'm thinking that's a later. It's the SEC. I'm thinking it's a later game. Right now, Texas A&M is a 14-point favorite on the road. I thought it would be more because Tennessee again, not any good. What's going on? We have the Mountain West Championship game going on. We will not talk about that in our picks, but Boise State is a 6.5-point favorite against San Jose State. They are playing at Sam Boyd Stadium in Vegas. And San Jose State, not too bad. Number 24 in the country. They're 6-0, but Boise State only a touchdown favorite. I would stay away from that game. Boise State is kind of they're that team. They're the team in the Mountain West, but There's just something weird about San Jose State this year. Obviously, we'll talk about Bama and Florida coming up, Tulsa, Cincinnati as well. Some of the games that were canceled, by the way, in the top 25. And how about this? This really stinks. You want to talk about a group of 5 teams that need more respect? Louisiana and Coastal Carolina. They were supposed to play in the Sun Belt Conference Championship game. It's canceled. It is canceled. Louisiana, Coastal Carolina. I was looking forward to that. That's canceled. Coastal Carolina. Can you imagine if Coastal Carolina won that game and they're 12-0? A full season, 12 games. I mean, realistically, they should play 13 in a regular year with a conference title game. But can you imagine Coastal Carolina beating a fellow top 20 team? They finished 12-0. Coastal Carolina, I think, would be in a New Year's Six bowl at that point. They have to be, and you can still make the argument for them anyway. But if they won that game 12-0, they probably move from 12 to 10, maybe even 9 with that resume. Because now at that point, you've got a heck of a schedule there. They've already beaten Louisiana this year. Heck of a year for Coastal Carolina. Again, they beat Kansas, they beat Campbell, Arkansas State. Beat Louisiana on the road, ranked win. Georgia Southern, Georgia State, Southern Alabama. No good, I get it. The Troy game was postponed, they ended up beating them. They beat Appalachian State. Okay. Texas State, they dominated, but then they beat BYU. But they just keep winning. They haven't lost, so their ranking is warranted. And if they beat Louisiana twice, I mean, you can't convince me this team is not a top 10 team in the country. I'm not talking playoff for the Coastal Carolina Chanticleers. But I am talking top 10 ranking and possible New Year's Six bowl. Unfortunately, that game has been canceled, so there's going to be no Sun Belt Championship game. I believe, I'm pretty sure they're not rescheduling this game, so they are going to, I think, just give Coastal Carolina the de facto Sun Belt Championship this year because they were undefeated and they already did beat Louisiana earlier in the season. Otherwise, you can't play. I mean, Appalachian State is 8-3, 6-2 in the conference, and that's pretty much it. Everybody else is 500 or below in the conference in the Sun Belt. So that's the way that shakes out. But gotta love the Coastal Carolina story this season, and their coach just got a huge contract extension. I believe it was 7 years. I'll look up the exact numbers for you, but he just got Jamie Chadwell. He agreed to a contract extension, so he's going to be the coach through 2027. Huge extension. Good for him, and good for that program. Other than that, folks, I mean, there are a couple games. Michigan, Iowa was canceled. Vanderbilt, Georgia was canceled. Georgia Tech, Miami was canceled as well. Let's see what else we have on the FBS schedule here today. Stuff the conference championship games. Florida State, Wake Forest. Does that interest you? Air Force, Army. How about that? Army playing a game after they beat Navy? Never happens. Well, at least regular season wise, but that'll be for the Commander-in-Chief trophy. Ole Miss, LSU. It could be interesting to see if LSU goes back to. It's Lane Kiffin against LSU, so it's going to have some intrigue at 3:30 today. Missouri, Mississippi State, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Penn State, if that tickles your fancy. Stanford, UCLA. How about Chip Kelly? 3-3 at UCLA this year. Gotta love him. They are 7-point favorites at home later tonight. Michigan State, Maryland. I believe that game was in jeopardy. I mean, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure that was canceled earlier in the week. As ESPN still has that up. And of course, Alabama, Florida. Arizona State, Oregon State later as well. All right, so that is your schedule here for today. All right, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side, we'll get into the picks segment as we are 30, 33, and 2 on the year. Hopefully a 5-0 week gets us over 500, or at least a 4-1 week, folks, could get us back to 500 before we go into the postseason here on this show. Keep it locked here. It's College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio.
Now back to College Football Pick'em with Nick Kosko, presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio.
Final segment of the show here, College Football Pick'em on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. I'm your host, Nick Kosko. We are presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu, located inside the Attilas Gym in Egg Harbor Township. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at NickKosko59. Be sure to follow the station as well at 1490 SportsBet. Check out Harbor Jiu-Jitsu as well at harborjujitsu.com and find them on Instagram and Facebook as well. Follow them, give them a like, do all that stuff. Find out or get the information for your free trial class as well. If you want private sessions as well, those are available. And of course, we have classes Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday, mostly in the evening. We also have some morning striking classes as well, I believe on Tuesdays and Thursdays, if memory serves me correct as well. Also just added a all-ladies MMA striking class as well, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2 to 3 p.m. right there. It's in the back. It's in the back part of the gym, folks. The back room. Great studio for jiu-jitsu. Great class, great instruction from my guy Albruce. He trains under Gary Tonin, world-renowned grappler and undefeated MMA fighter at the moment right now. So it's a great time. Get in there, great workout, learn a great sport and martial art. All right, picks time here for our show. As we mentioned, we are picking the five of the conference championship games here today. And we are going to start out, of course, with my conference, the best conference, of course, the Big Ten, Northwestern, Ohio State. This line is we had it at 20.5 earlier in the week, so we are going to roll with that. Northwestern, the money has moved us slightly in the favor. The line is now minus 20, actually, for Ohio State. Over-under still at 57, so really hasn't moved much, but obviously the money is going towards Northwestern just a little bit. But we're going to stick with Northwestern here, folks, and here's why. 20.5, that's a lot of points. 20 points is a lot of points. And don't get me wrong, Ohio State beat Northwestern 2 years ago in the title game, 45-24, so there you go, 21 points. They destroyed them last year when they played in the regular season, but this is a different Northwestern team, folks. That defense is legit. I love Ohio State's offense. Now, I think they're going to have an impressive victory, but I don't think they're going to win by 3 touchdowns. I do believe Ohio State is going to win this game. They'll be 6-0. They'll get into the playoffs, much to the chagrin of Iowa State and Bob Bowlesby. But Ohio State will win this game, but I love what Pat Fitzgerald has done with this program at Northwestern. They will cover this game, so give me Northwestern plus 20.5. And what we hope is a pretty entertaining Big Ten championship game coming up here at noon today. That is over, of course, in Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. Again, over-under at 57. I would expect that to go over because Ohio State's going to put up at least 35 points in my mind. And let's say they win by 14. There you go, you're 49. Or they win by 14. So you would hope it's a 35-21 game right there at 56. So right around there, but I do think it is going to go over. Ohio State is going to put up at least 35, so there's a good shot for the over there, but I do like Northwestern to cover, though, plus 20.5. All right, also at noon, Oklahoma and Iowa State. I'm glad both these games are on at the same time, so it's going to be fascinating to watch them side by side and see what happens in terms of these playoff rankings in case there is an upset. Oklahoma is a 6-point favorite I can't even say on the road. Neutral site, it's in Jerry World at AT&T Stadium. We had Oklahoma, by the way, minus 5.5 earlier in the week. So we got it in thanks to Rich Quinones on Back Your Play on Wednesday. So we do have Oklahoma 5.5. And I do think, I think they're going to end up winning. I don't care what Bob Bowlesby says about Iowa State, as I mentioned in the previous segment. But Oklahoma, I think they're the hotter team. Both teams are hot right now. I mean, Oklahoma's won 6 in a row. Iowa State's won 5 in a row, but Oklahoma does have Spencer Rattler. They do have Lincoln Riley as the head coach, and they have the championship experience, folks. They've won 3 straight Big 12 titles. They've been to the playoff 3 straight years. They're not going to get to the playoff this year, as they're a little bit too far out at number 10, and they do have the 2 losses, but I do think Oklahoma ends up winning this game. Rattler has come into his own. I can't wait to watch them next year when he's a redshirt sophomore and with a year under his belt and a couple more players coming in. Oklahoma is going to be dangerous once again next year. They're going to remain dangerous right now. Repeat as Big 12 champions, for Pete really, and do cover the 5.5 against Iowa State. Iowa State has a great running game. Breece Hall, almost 1,400 yards. He's got 17 touchdowns on the ground, but I do like the way Oklahoma plays. I do expect a shootout over under 58. I would think that goes over, especially indoors at Cowboy Stadium. Rattler, though, has the advantage at quarterback over Brock Purdy. Breece Hall, the better running back, but I do like Oklahoma here to cover minus 5.5. All right, Clemson, Notre Dame, that is the big one here tonight. Number 3 versus number 2, or later in the afternoon, at 4 o'clock. Clemson is a 10.5-point favorite, and while, folks, I do believe they are going to win, putting both these teams into the college football playoff, Notre Dame's going to cover. Trevor Lawrence not playing in the first time around with DJ Uiagalelei as the freshman quarterback playing for the Tigers earlier this year at Notre Dame. That was not the reason why Clemson lost, and you can't say that was the reason why Notre Dame ended up beating them. I do think Clemson is going to win, though. Lawrence, let me rewind a little bit. With Lawrence, Clemson has a better shot to win, and I think they do win because they have the experience, big game experience, and Lawrence does make a big difference. However, he's not worth a 10.5 point spread. Notre Dame won that first game because they gashed Clemson's defense. Well, I think Clemson's going to win. I can't rule out that Clemson's defense could get gashed up the middle once again because Kyron Williams is a darn good back. Over 1,000 yards this year for Notre Dame, 12 touchdowns on the ground. Ian Book is probably going to play it a little bit more safe. He'll play it safer this time. Won't be a gunslinger in this game. He'll make plays when he has to, but ultimately, I think Clemson wins the game, but 10.5 is just too much. I like Notre Dame plus 10.5 in the ACC championship game, but expect both these teams to make the playoff, and God forbid we get this game a third time in the semifinals or even the finals coming up later in a few weeks, really. Alabama, Florida. That is tonight, 8 o'clock. Number 1, Alabama. Number 7, Florida. SEC championship game, and folks, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to bank my time, bank my chances on Florida. They are plus 17 in Atlanta. This is going to be an offensive shootout. That's what the SEC has turned into, at least with the top teams. Mac Jones on the other side for Alabama, the quarterback, pulling the trigger, handing off to Najee Harris or throwing to John Mechie, Devontae Smith especially, who's now a firm Heisman contender. Doesn't matter. Alabama is going to score a crap ton of points. They will score a lot. I can easily, and this game is at 74.5. This game could end 45-42. These offenses are close. Alabama probably has a better overall offense, but Florida does come back with Kyle Trask, who's still, in my mind, the Heisman frontrunner. He's unbelievable. 40 touchdowns on the year. He's approaching 4,000 yards. I would expect him to, Bama's defense, by the way, has the edge over Florida's defense. So Bama's defense will give Trask some fits early on, probably, but he's just too good this year to not be able to cover at least that 17-point spread. I would expect Kyle Trask to be over 4,000 yards and at least at 43 touchdowns by the end of this game on the season. Kyle Pitts, the all-star tight end, could be a top 10 pick in the 2021 draft. He is back this week today as well, and I would expect Florida to keep this game close. It will be close. It's going to be a shootout. Bama is going to win. I can't see Florida pulling off the upset, barring some minor miracle. Florida will cover, though. I can see the game being, like I said, 45-42 or along the lines of maybe a 45-35 type of game. But Alabama, that is a lot of points, and this is a really quality opponent. I don't care if they lost to LSU last week. Florida's still quality, and now they're in a championship game atmosphere. And, of course, you have the turf. You're indoors. It's going to be an offensive bonanza. So I do like Florida to cover here, plus 17 in the SEC championship game. Final pick of the show, it's Tulsa, Cincinnati. Also at 8 o'clock tonight, it's the American Athletic Conference championship game. I like Cincinnati at 14.5. That's the line right now, actually. We had them at 14, so we do get that favor of the half a point there. So, either way, it's relatively the same. But we can get the push, though, if necessary. But I do like Cincinnati minus 14, though, over Tulsa. They were supposed to play them last week. That game was canceled, and they figured, well, they're playing each other in the championship game next week anyway, so let's not try to force it, which is true, but, Cincinnati could have used a rank win last week and then beating up the same team again would have been nice for the resume, but I do like Cincinnati. They're not going to make the playoff as much as I would love them to somehow make the playoff. They won't get in, but I think they are conference champions this year, 9-0. Luke Fickell, his best season at the helm, and Cincinnati does cover the 14. Like I said, they have killed everybody except Central Florida this year. All right, Tulsa, very good, but Cincinnati's on a different level in that conference. They've beaten everybody by double digits, except for Central Florida, as I just mentioned, but they will do it again here. They'll cover the 14. So, quick recap. We have Northwestern plus 20.5, Oklahoma minus 5.5, Notre Dame plus 10.5, Florida plus 17, and Cincinnati minus 14. Those are your picks for the conference championship games here today. So enjoy those games, folks. Enjoy the day. College football playoff rankings. The final ones come out tomorrow. We'll discuss it all next week. You've been listening to College Football Pick'em on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. I'm Nick Kosko. We're presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu. We'll see you next week.